The sea was restless, its waves crashing against the cliffs of Ireland with the force of an untamed beast. Winds howled across the hills, carrying with them the whispers of ancient stories. In those days, when the world was younger and the earth had not yet grown quiet, Ireland was said to be home to beings larger than life, giants whose very presence shaped the land beneath their feet. Among them lived one whose name would never be forgotten, Finn McCool. His stature was mighty and his strength unmatched, yet those who knew his tale understood he was more than a figure of power. He was a guardian. His footsteps shook the valleys, his shadow fell over lakes and forests. But the people of Ireland did not fear him. They looked upon him with trust, for Finn's heart belonged to his land, and he carried upon his broad shoulders a duty to protect it from any threat that came from beyond the horizon. It was not peace that followed giants. Where there was greatness, there was always envy. Where there was strength, there was always challenge. Across the sea in Scotland, another giant watched Ireland with sharp and hungry eyes. His name was Bonandener. Bonandener was known for his fierceness, for his endless hunger for conquest. His body towered above the mountains of his homeland, and his roar could be heard rumbling across the valleys like thunder before a storm. The Scots whispered of his temper, of his strength that could tear the roots of the earth itself. And when the sea winds carried the name of Finn McCool to his ears, Bonandener's pride began to burn. Two giants, divided by waters, each unwilling to bow before the other. And so the seeds of rivalry were planted. The world of men was small compared to theirs. Villages huddled near forests, cattle grazed on rolling hills, and the people told stories around their fires. Yet above all, there was always the thought of the giants. They were not creatures of mist or mere tales to frighten children. They were real as the ground underfoot. Their shadows stretched across the imagination, and their deeds were carried from mouth to mouth until the very air seemed filled with them. Finn McCool, though mighty, was not cruel. He walked the cliffs with calm eyes, gazing over the sea as if he could sense the distant rival waiting. There was strength in him, yes, but also a quietness, as though the weight of his role pressed heavily upon him. He knew that one day, challenge would come. Giants were not meant to remain still. But the story of Finn does not begin with war. It begins with the land itself. Ireland, a place of rolling green hills, wild seas, and skies filled with endless clouds. A land where myths breathed with the wind, and stones seemed to remember footsteps that had come before. In such a land, it was said that Finn's strength came not from his size alone, but from his bond with the earth he walked upon. Every rock, every river, every tree seemed to answer to him. And so, when he rose in the morning, the people felt safe. Yet even the strongest guardian cannot stand unchallenged forever. The sea that separated Ireland from Scotland was no barrier for giants. The distance was but a stretch of waves, and across those waters, Bonandener's presence loomed. He was larger, broader, his muscles like ridges of stone. Where Finn inspired respect, Bonandener inspired fear. He was not a protector but a conqueror, not content to rule his own land when others remained beyond his grasp. Legends tell of the nights when waves carried voices across the waters. When storms raged and thunder split the skies, the giants were said to shout to one another over the roar of the sea. Words of challenge, words of mockery, and though no man dared to sail close enough to hear clearly, the people of Ireland claimed they could feel the ground tremble with each call. Finn McCool did not shrink from such words, but neither did he rush into reckless battle. He waited, his eyes fixed on the horizon, listening to the whispers of destiny carried on the wind. Children would gather at the feet of their elders and ask, "Is it true that Finn's shadow can stretch across the mountains?" And the elders, their faces lit by the fire, would nod and say, "Yes." And when he walks, the earth listens. The stories of giants were not fancies in those days. They were warnings, reminders that greatness carried both wonder and danger. For what would happen if two such beings clashed? Would the seas split apart? Would the land crumble? Would men be crushed under the weight of their anger? No one knew. And yet, deep inside, all feared the day when Finn and Bonandener would meet face to face. There were nights when the sky over Ireland glowed with fire, and the people whispered that it was Finn sharpening his weapons against stone. There were mornings when the air trembled with distant rumbles, and they claimed it was Banananer striking the ground with his fists in Scotland. Legends grew, not only of their power, but of fate that seemed to draw them closer with every passing season. Finn McCool was no ordinary giant. His strength was matched by his wit, and his love for his wife Unak gave him more than brute force ever could. Together, they built a life that balanced power with wisdom. But across the waters, Banananer had no such balance. He was alone in his might, and with loneliness came hunger. Hunger for battle, hunger for victory, hunger to prove that no giant could rival him. And so, even before they met, the tale of Finn McCool and Banananer was written in the whispers of waves and the echoes of storms. Ireland held its breath. Scotland waited with fire in its chest. The land itself seemed caught between two titans. Each step they took shaking the very bones of the earth. It was only a matter of time before destiny called them together, and when it did, the world would never be the same. The sea was restless that morning, as if the waters themselves already knew a storm far greater than wind and rain was about to rise. The cliffs of Scotland stood tall against a gray horizon, jagged teeth biting into the sky, and from them came a sound that shook both land and ocean, a roar, a voice so deep it seemed carved from stone. It was the voice of Banananer, the Red Man of Scotland. He was no ordinary giant. His hair burned the color of fire, and his body was broad as a fortress wall. Men whispered that his arms were like the trunks of great oaks, and his fists could shatter mountains. It was said he could rip a tree from its roots with a single tug, and cast it aside as though it were nothing but straw. Boulders were his weapons, weapons he could hurl across valleys with enough force to shake the earth. When his anger boiled, the sky darkened, and storms followed him like loyal beasts. This was the giant who gazed across the waters and saw Ireland. This was the giant who heard whispers of another, Finn McCool, protector of the Emerald Isle. And pride, sharp and merciless, grew in his heart. Standing upon the cliff's edge, Banananer bellowed across the sea, his words carried by the wind, heavy and unyielding. Finn McCool, if you are as mighty as they claim, come face me. Come, and we shall see whose strength is greater. The roar rolled across the waves, striking the shores of Ireland like thunder. Fishermen trembled in their boats. Families gathered by their fires, their faces pale with dread. The people knew what such a battle could mean. When two giants of this power clashed, the earth itself would groan beneath them. Hills would crumble, rivers would change their course, and no man or beast would escape the echo of their war. Ireland was quiet, quiet but for the sea that carried Banananer's challenge to its shores. And on those shores stood Finn McCool. He gazed across the dark waters, his face carved in thought, his eyes steady. Finn was not as large as Banananer. His frame was broad, his strength unmatched by any man. But his rival was said to stand taller than mountains, his stride long enough to cross valleys in but a few steps. The people feared what would happen should the two meet. Yet Finn did not waver. Pride stirred in him, but it was not pride alone. It was duty. Ireland was his land. And to ignore Banananer's challenge would invite shame upon his name and weakness upon his people. The Red Man would not rest. He would keep shouting. He would keep taunting. And one day, he would cross the waters himself. Finn clenched his fists, his great hands rough with the strength of the earth. He stood upon the edge of Ireland and whispered into the wind, I will face him, whatever the cost. The waves answered with a crash. Word spread quickly through the villages. Finn McCool had accepted the challenge of Banananer. Fear and awe mingled in the hearts of the people. Some prayed for Finn's victory. Others prayed that the fight would never come, but they knew the ground could not bear such fury. Still, no one doubted that Finn would stand his ground. He was their protector, their giant, their hope. Yet even hope carried shadows. At night, when the fires burned low and the sky lay heavy with clouds, the people spoke of what might come. If Finn fought and lost, who would protect him then? If Banananer triumphed, would he not claim Ireland as his own, crushing every village under his mighty heel? Some whispered that it might be wiser to avoid the fight, to let the sea remain a boundary between them. But such thoughts were fleeting. Everyone knew the truth. Giants were not creatures who could be kept apart forever. The sea between Ireland and Scotland was no true wall. For men, It was wide and treacherous. But for giants, it was but a stretch of water. And giants did not fear water. Banananer's voice came again, carried on the wind, mocking, taunting. His laughter shook the cliffs, rolling across the waters like an endless storm. He mocked Finn's courage, calling him weak, calling him small. Each word was a blade meant to pierce the heart of Ireland. And though the people trembled, Finn only grew steadier. He would not allow such insult to linger. He would not allow his land to be shamed. And yet, how was he to reach his rival? The waters stretched wide, too deep and fierce to wade, too long to leap. To meet Banananer, he would need a path, a bridge, a way to cross the roaring sea. But that was yet to come. For now, the challenge hung heavy over the waters, a promise of battle that neither giant would forget. The days that followed were uneasy. Farmers worked their fields with glances to the horizon, as though expecting to see two colossal shapes rising from a mist. Children played but whispered Finn and Banananer in voices soft as a breeze. The land seemed to wait, holding its breath. And in Scotland, Banananer waited too. His temper flared like fire, his patience thin as smoke. He longed for the day Finn would come. Each sunrise found him pacing the cliffs, his eyes fixed on the waves, his ears straining for the sound of footsteps that might echo from across the sea. His pride demanded it. His rage demanded it. For in his heart, he could not bear the thought of another giant standing as his equal. But Finn was not a fool. He knew his rival's size. He knew his rival's fury. To fight such a giant with brute strength alone might mean ruin. And so he stood upon the cliffs of Ireland, silent, thoughtful, his mind working as steadily as his heart. The wind carried Banananer's challenge again, bold and merciless. Come, Finn McCool. Come, if you're truly a giant. And Finn's reply was not shouted. It was spoken low, but the sea seemed to carry it all the same. I will come. One way or another, I will come. Ireland listened. Scotland waited. The sea, restless and unending, raged between them. Two giants, divided by waters, bound by pride. The world itself seemed smaller when compared to their footsteps. And all who lived upon it knew the day they met would shake the very bones of the earth. The sea stretched wide, restless and endless, its waves rising and falling like the breath of some ancient beast. On the Irish shore stood Finn McCool, his gaze fixed across the waters toward Scotland. There, beyond the mist and crashing waves, his rival waited. Banananer, the Red Man, the terror of the northern cliffs. His challenge still echoed across the sea, carried on the wind like thunder that refused to fade. Finn's heart was steady, yet heavy. He knew he could not leave the insult unanswered. His land depended on him. His pride demanded it. But how could even a giant cross a sea that seemed as wide as eternity itself? The waters were deep, fierce, and endless. To step into them would mean death. Even for one as strong as him. He stood in silence, listening to the roar of the ocean. Then, as though the earth itself had whispered a secret into his ear, an idea began to form. He was not only a creature of muscle and bone. He was cleverer, sharper mind than many believed. Where strength alone might fail, we could carve a path. Finn bent low to the ground. His great hands pressed against the soil of Ireland, the land he had sworn to protect. He could feel the strength of the earth beneath his palms, the old power that had shaped mountains, carved valleys, and raised cliffs to meet the sky. That strength would answer him now. With a roar, he tore free the first great column of rock. The ground shook as it rose from the earth, a massive pillar of stone larger than the tallest towers of men. Finn lifted it high, his arms straining with power, then hurled it into the sea. The waters crashed, foam and spray rising like thunderclouds, but the stone stood firm. A single step, a single foothold stretching into the ocean. The people of Ireland, gathered on the hills above, gasped in awe. Never had they seen such might. Never had they imagined such a vision. Finn did not stop. Again, he reached into the earth, pulling free another column, its side straight as though cut by unseen hands. He hurled it into the sea, where it landed beside the first. The waves struck it, but it did not move. Then another, and another. Stone after stone fell into place. forming a line across the waters. One by one, the pillars rose, their tops even and flat, fitting together as though they had always been part of the same design. It was not chaos. It was order. Each rock seemed to lock into the next, creating a path of perfect shapes. Hexagons, sharp-edged and precise, stretching into the ocean as if carved by divine hands. The people could only watch in silence. Their giant was building a road, a causeway fit not for men, but for giants. And as the path grew, so too did the weight of destiny. Every stone carried Finn closer to Scotland, closer to Benandiner, closer to the battle that all feared but none could stop. The sea roared, as though it too knew what was coming. The gulls cried overhead, circling the growing bridge as if they sensed the power in the air. Finn's hands bled with the strain of his work. His chest rose and fell like a furnace, his breath steaming in the cold air. Yet he did not falter. For every pillar he hurled into the waters, another step was won. His land demanded it. His honor required it. His rival waited, and the time for delay was gone. From across the sea, Benandiner saw the path begin to rise. His laughter boomed across the waves, shaking the cliffs of Scotland. To him, the sight was not a threat, but an invitation. He too stepped toward the water's edge, his colossal frame blotting out the sky. His eyes burned with hunger for fight, and his voice rang out again, "Come, Finn McCool, come and meet me if you dare." The words carried across the causeway, slamming against Finn's chest like a hammer. He stood upon the newly laid stones, his figure rising against the stormy horizon, though distance still lay between them. The two giants could already see each other, two shapes, vast and unyielding, staring across the waves with the promise of war. The people whispered that the earth itself trembled in fear, but Finn did not waver. The causeway stretched further and further into the sea, each stone a testament to his will. The path seemed endless, yet he pressed on, the rhythm of his labor echoing like a drumbeat, rock after rock, column after column, until the ocean was no longer a barrier but a bridge. It was not only a work of strength, it was a symbol, a mark upon the world that would last for ages. The people who saw it would never forget. The very shape of the stones, the perfection of their edges, would stand long after the giants themselves were gone. For this was no mortal road. This was a giant's causeway. Yet for Finn, the work was not finished. For though the path was laid, the battle awaited. Each stone brought him closer to Benandiner. Each breath carried him nearer to the clash that might shatter the world. The sky darkened as clouds gathered above, drawn by the fury rising between the two giants. Lightning split the heavens, its flash reflected in the black waters below. The sea churned, waves rising high as if trying to swallow the causeway whole. But the stones held firm. The bridge would not break. And still Finn worked, stone after stone, his mind set on the rival waiting for him. He did not look back. He did not rest. The people of Ireland watched in silence, their hearts filled with both pride and dread, for they knew what waited at the other end of that path. The air was thick with tension, every sound sharp, every heartbeat loud. The story of giants had never felt more real. It was no longer whispers by the fire, no longer tales told to children. It was here, before their eyes, carved in stone and thunder. When at last the causeway reached deep into the sea, stretching like a serpent rock, Finn stood tall upon its edge. His chest heaved, his hands raw, but his eyes shone with fierce light. He had built his road. He had carved his way toward destiny. Behind him, the people trembled in awe. Before him, across the waters, the Red Man of Scotland waited, his silhouette dark against the storm. The causeway was ready. The sea was restless, and the storm of battle was near. The sea churned, wild and heavy, as if the waters themselves feared what was about to unfold. The air grew thick, each gust of wind carrying the smell of salt and storm. Finn McCool stood upon the stones he had hurled into the ocean, the great causeway stretching behind him like the spine of the earth itself. His chest rose and fell with steady breath. But his heart carried a weight it had never known before. For across the water, the Red Man of Scotland had seen his work. Benandiner, the giant who made mountains seem small, whose shadow could stretch across valleys, whose rage hit the ground like thunder. And now he was moving. The sound of his first step rolled across the sea like an avalanche. The very cliffs of Scotland seemed to groan as he pushed himself forward, his colossal frame rising against the sky. Each stride brought him closer to the stones, and with every stride, the sea answered with waves that crashed like walls of fury. The people of Ireland, watching from the safety of the hills, clutched one another in terror, for what they saw was beyond anything their stories had prepared them for. They had spoken of giants, yes, but never one so vast, never one so terrible. Banana's body towered like a mountain set into motion. His legs were like pillars carved from iron, his arms thick as ancient oaks, his chest broad as a cliff face. His hair blazed red against the storm, whipping in the wind like fire, and his eyes burned with a terrible light. Two coals that pierced the mist and fixed upon Ireland. And then came the roar. It tore through the sky, a sound so fierce it sent birds wheeling in panic, their cries swallowed by the bellow of the red man. The roar rolled over the waves, striking the Irish cliffs with such force that rocks tumbled loose and the ground trembled. It was not only a challenge, it was a promise of destruction. Banana stepped onto the causeway. The stones shook beneath his feet, but they did not give way. Finn had built them strong, and they held as though the earth itself willed them to stand. Step by step, the Scottish giant advanced, each stride swallowing the distance between the lands. The waves burst against the stones, foaming white around his ankles, but he did not slow. Finn watched him come, his great hands curled into fists, his breath sharp. Never before had he felt such unease. He had fought beasts, he had torn rocks from the ground. He had guarded his land from threats both seen and unseen. But this was different. This was a giant whose size dwarfed even his own. A giant said to be as tall as the highest peaks, whose fist could crush cliffs to dust, whose voice could call storms from the skies. Finn's heart pounded, heavy as a drum in his chest. For the first time, doubt flickered within him. Could he truly face such a rival? The people saw the hesitation in his stance, the weight in his eyes, and though they feared, they still looked to him with hope. For Finn McCool was more than their giant. He was their protector, the one who stood when no other could. Even if the red man rose like a mountain, Finn must face him. Banana's shadow stretched across the causeway, long and dark, reaching toward the Irish shore. With every step, that shadow grew, swallowing stone after stone, until it fell across Finn himself. He stood in its darkness, the sea roaring at his sides, the air thick with the taste of storm. The red man's voice thundered once more. Finn McCool, at last we meet. Let us see if your strength is worthy of the stories. His words cracked like thunder across the water, leaving silence in their wake. Finn's lips tightened. His pride burned. He could not turn away. He could not let fear rule him. And yet, the size of the monster striding toward him was unlike anything his eyes had ever seen. His mind raced. His strength was great, but brute force alone might not be enough. Still, he did not step back. He planted his feet firmly upon the stones, his chest rising with deep, steady breath. If he was to face this rival, he would face him as a giant of Ireland, as a protector his people believed him to be. The waves rose higher, smashing against the stones. Lightning forked across the sky, its glow flashing against Banana's form. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the storm itself bowed to the red man, bending to his fury. And Finn, standing in the shadow of the mountain-sized giant, felt the full weight of destiny pressing upon him. The causeway trembled. The air grew still. Two giants, one of Ireland, one of Scotland, now stood upon the same path. The world seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, as Banana's firelit eyes fixed upon him, Finn knew the storm of battle was no longer distant. It was here. The storm had gathered, heavy and dark, as if the sky itself feared what was about to come. The sea roared against the causeway, foam rising high as the red man of Scotland drew closer with every step. His shadow stretched farther, swallowing fields, cliffs, and finally the home of Ireland's protector. Inside that home sat Finn McCool. His hands, one steady enough to tear rocks from the earth, now trembled ever so slightly. His heart beat like the drum of war. Never had he known fear, not in battle, not in challenge. But this rival was no ordinary giant. Bonandener was larger than any living thing Finn had ever seen. To meet him in strength alone would mean ruin. It was then that Unak, Finn's wife, stepped forward. She was no towering figure, no mountain of muscle, yet her presence carried power of a different kind. Her eyes, sharp and thoughtful, caught the flicker of fear in her husband's gaze. She laid a hand upon his arm, firm and steady. "Bravery alone will not save us," she whispered. "Let me think." The ground shook as Bonandener's steps drew closer. The very air seemed to shiver with each stride. Outside, the sky cracked with lightning, its flash revealing the shadow of the red man looming ever nearer. The people of Ireland cowered, waiting for the clash that would tear their world apart. But Unaka's mind was racing. She knew her husband's strength, but she also knew the truth. Against Bonandener's sheer size, strength would fail. If Ireland was to be saved, it would not be by force, but by cunning. At once she began to prepare. From the great hall, she pulled heavy blankets, thick as hides, and wrapped them around Finn. She hushed him with gentle words as she guided him to lie down. Though his pride bristled at the thought, she smoothed the blankets over his massive frame until only his face remained, softened by her touch. Then she brought forth a cradle, not the kind built for mortal children, but creation so vast that only giants could fashion it. Into this cradle she placed her husband, his massive body disguised beneath folds of cloth. To all who looked upon him, Finn McCool now seemed not a giant, but a child so impossibly large that no human mind could comprehend it. Unak stepped back, her eyes narrowing as the plan took shape. Outside, the sound of Bonandener's approach shook the air. His roar cut through the storm, bellowing Finn's name, demanding he come forth. But Unak was ready. When the giant's fist struck the doorframe, shaking the walls of their home, she did not flinch. She opened the door wide, and there stood Bonandener. His form filled the sky, his head brushing against the clouds, his eyes burning with fire that made even the storm seem dim. His gaze swept down, searching for his rival. Whereas Finn McCool, his voice thundered, rattling the stones. Unak met his stare with calm that few would have dared. "He is not here," she said. Her tone was smooth, carrying neither fear nor defiance. "He has gone hunting, but you may step inside if you wish. You can rest, though you must be quiet, for the child is asleep." Bonandener's brow furrowed. "Child," he repeated, his voice softer but still sharp as steel. She nodded, stepping aside to reveal the cradle at the far end of the hall. "Yes," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "Our son rests there." The giant turned his gaze to the cradle. At first, his lips curled into a sneer, ready to mock. But then his eyes caught the size of the blankets, the breadth of the frame, the sheer enormity of the shape lying beneath. His sneer faltered, his breath caught. He stepped closer, his massive form bending low, and peered inside. There lay Finn, silent and still, disguised as an infant in slumber. His hand, broad as a cartwheel, twitched beneath the blankets as though stirred in sleep. Bonandener's face drained of color. His fiery eyes flickered with something Ireland had never seen in him before. Fear. If this was a child, if this sleeping figure was but a babe of Finn McCool, then what size must a father be? What strength must a giant himself carry, if his child already towered so impossibly? The thought struck him like a blow. His chest heaved, his massive frame trembling. He looked again, certain his eyes had deceived him, but the cradle remained. The blanket stirred faintly. The child's breath, steady and deep, rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. Bonandener staggered back. His fists, once raised for war, fell limp at his sides. The storm outside seemed to falter, as if even the skies had seen his courage wane. His pride, sharp and burning, now tangled with dread. Unak watched him carefully, her face composed, her voice steady. "You wish to see Finn McCool," she said softly, "but he is away. Only his child remains. You would not harm a sleeping child, would you?" The words struck him deeper than any weapon. He shook his head, muttering beneath his breath, though no words came clear. His fiery eyes darted between Unak and the cradle, his thoughts racing. If the child was already so vast, how could he, Benandiner, hope to stand against a father? The battle he had long desired now seemed less like glory and more like doom. The people of Ireland watched from afar, their eyes wide, their voices hushed. They saw the shadow of the red man quiver, saw the might of Scotland's greatest giant falter before the wisdom of Unak. It was not Finn's fist that turned him back, but Unak's wit sharper than any blade. Benandiner's roar returned, but now it carried a different sound. Not of fury, not of pride, but of retreat. With a sudden turn, he fled from the hall, his massive steps shaking the causeway behind him. Each stride carried him farther from the cradle, farther from Ireland, farther from the terrible truth he believed he had seen. Unak stood at the doorway, her eyes following his retreat. She knew the danger was not yet gone, but for now, her plan had held. Inside the cradle, Finn stirred, his pride bruised though his life spared. He looked to his wife, and though no words passed between them, he knew. Her wisdom had saved him. Her cunning had saved Ireland. The storm outside began to fade, its roar slipping into silence. The sea, restless and wild, calmed slowly around the broken stones. And upon those stones, the shadow of Benandiner fled, leaving behind a mark of fear etched upon his colossal form. Ireland breathed again. The tale of Finn McCool and the cleverness of Unak would live on, whispered by firesides, told by elders, and carried through generations. For strength alone could not always protect a land. Sometimes it was the sharpness of the mind, the quiet of wisdom, that shielded all from ruin. And in that hall, where a cradle too large for men had stood, the legend of Unak's clever plan was born, a reminder that even the mightiest of giants could tremble when faced with the power of wit. The hall was silent, except for the faint rumble of the sea outside. Unak stood tall, her eyes steady, as Benandiner bent over the cradle. His breath came in sharp bursts, his massive chest heaving, as though the very air had turned heavy in his lungs. The giant who had torn trees from their roots, who had crushed boulders into dust, now stared with pale face and trembling hands. There before him lay the child, Finn McCool wrapped in blankets, disguised by his wife's cunning. The infant's great fingers curled gently in sleep, as large as branches of an oak. His chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm of slumber, each breath a sound deep and thunderous, like the rumbling of distant storms. Benandiner's mind spun. If this was the child, if this massive creature, already the size of a hill, was only Finn's son, then what unimaginable power must a father possess? What kind of monster had he challenged? The heat of his pride cooled into ice. The fire in his eyes flickered, dimmed. His knees, strong enough to carry mountains, weakened beneath him. For the first time in his life, the red man of Scotland trembled. The silence stretched long. Unak stood near the hearth, calm as stone, her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. She knew what he was thinking. Her plan had struck its mark. The mighty challenger who had roared across the sea was now filled not with fury, but with dread. Benandiner took a step back, his enormous hand pressing against the doorway to steady himself. His breath came ragged, his eyes darting between the cradle and Unak's unwavering gaze. The thought gnawed at his heart until it broke his courage completely. Without a word, he turned. The floor shook as his colossal frame shifted, his massive body lumbering through the doorway. His stride was frantic, each step slamming against the earth like thunder. The walls rattled, the ground quaked, and the people outside cried out as they saw the red man retreat. He fled. The giant feared by all, the terror of Scotland, was running. His massive legs carried him down the causeway, the stones trembling beneath his fury. His feet struck so hard that cracks split the earth, and the sea boiled at his sides as though stirred by his rage. Each stride was a storm. Waves surged higher, smashing against the rocks, foaming white as they rose to cliffs. The air grew heavy, pressed down by the force's retreat. The people clutched one another, their hearts racing, their eyes wide. They could not believe what they saw. The great Benandiner, who had mocked, who had threatened, who had loomed over Ireland like a mountain of fire, was fleeing in terror from a child that was not a child at all. But Unak knew better. She watched from the doorway, her eyes shining with quiet triumph. Her plan had worked, but she did not laugh. She did not cheer, for she could see what others could not. The danger was not gone. Banananer's fear was sharp, but it was edged with rage. His pride, shattered, bled into fury. And as he ran, his wrath poured into the sea itself. The waters churned and boiled, waves rising like walls of black glass. The causeway beneath him groaned, shaking with each step. Stones split and fell into the deep, vanishing into the endless foam. It was as though the red man sought to tear apart the very bridge that had brought him here. If he could not conquer Finn McCool, then he would make sure no giant ever crossed between Ireland and Scotland again. The earth itself seemed to cry out. Pillars of stone cracked and sank. The once solid path trembled, breaking apart piece by piece. The thunder of Banananer's retreat echoed across the sea, not only in sound but in ruin. Finn, still wrapped in the cradle, stirred. His pride ached, his heart heavy with the shame of lying hidden while his rival raged. But Unak placed a hand upon his chest, her voice low and steady. Do not rise. The storm is not yet done. He listened, though every fiber of him longed to stand and face the rival fleeing from his door. His wife's wisdom had saved them once. He would not cast aside now. Outside, the red man's shadow grew smaller, swallowed by mist and sea spray as he fled across the crumbling causeway. His roars of fury rolled behind him, shaking the cliffs and rattling the stones. But there was fear in those roars, fear and rage twisted together into a sound that no man, no beast had ever heard before. The people watched as the giant disappeared into the distance, his figure swallowed by Scotland's looming cliffs. The sea raged for a long time after he had gone, waves hammering the broken causeway until the waters grew calm again. When at last silence fell, only fragments of stone remained scattered across the sea, like teeth of a shattered monster. The path between Ireland and Scotland was broken. Unak stepped back into her hall, her heart steady, though her hands shook at last. She looked to her husband, still lying beneath the blankets, and her eyes softened. It is done, she whispered. He will not return. Finn sat up slowly, the blankets falling from his broad shoulders. His face, carved with pride and weariness, turned toward the doorway where the last echoes of Banananer's retreat lingered in the air. His chest rose with a long breath, heavy with both relief and shame. Relief that his land was safe. Shame that he had not stood in battle, that his strength had been spared by cunning rather than fists. Yet when his eyes met Anaka's, he saw the truth. She had saved him. She had saved them all. Bravery alone might have brought ruin, but wisdom had brought victory. The people spoke of that day for generations. They told of the red man's retreat, of the boiling sea, of the causeway torn apart by a giant's fury. They told of Unaka's cleverness, how her wisdom outshone the might of two great titans. And though the causeway lay broken, its ruins remained as proof, rising from the sea like the bones of the earth itself. Travelers who came after would look upon those stones and wonder. Some said they were carved by fire long before men walked the earth. Others said they were laid by giants, a bridge that once stretched across the sea. And those who knew the old tales would whisper that it was Banananer's fear that broke the path. His retreat so furious that it shattered the very stones beneath his feet. Ireland stood safe once more, its cliffs unbroken, its people free of the shadow that had loomed so close. But the sea between Ireland and Scotland would never again be crossed by giants. The causeway, once strong, lay ruined forever. And so, the fear of the red man became legend. His name, once spoken with dread, became a story of folly, of pride undone by wisdom. And Finn McCool, though spared by his wife's wit, remained a giant in the hearts of his people, for he had faced a rival larger than any before him, and though doubt had flickered in his heart, Ireland had endured. The sea calmed, the wind softened, and the shadow of Banananer faded into memory. Yet the stones still whisper when the tide strikes them, telling the tale of the day a giant fled in fear, and the land itself was forever changed. The storm over the sea did not ease when Banananer turned to flee. It grew fiercer, darker, as if the sky itself had taken on his rage. The giant's massive strides pounded against the stones of the causeway, each step a thunderclap that shook both land and water. But fear drove him harder than pride, and with every pace his anger twisted deeper. He had come to Ireland to prove himself greater than Finn McCool. He had come to crush, to conquer, to stand unmatched. Instead, he had looked upon a cradle and seen his courage turn to dust. The fire of shame burned hotter than any storm he could summon. And in that shame, fury was born. With fists the size of boulders, Banananer struck at the stones beneath him. Pillars that had been pulled from the earth by Finn's strength splintered under his blows. He tore them free with his hands, heaved them into the sea, and shattered them into fragments. Each strike sent tremors through the waters, waves rising higher, swallowing the path he destroyed. The Causeway, once a bridge of giants, began to crumble. The people of Ireland, watching from the cliffs, saw the destruction with wide eyes and trembling hands. What Finn had built across the sea was being torn apart, piece by piece, by a giant's desperate rage. Rocks that had once stood proud above the waves now sank into deep, their sharp edges breaking like teeth knocked from a beast's jaw. The ocean floor became littered with their remains. Great hexagon columns, carved as though by divine hands, tumbled into the abyss, vanishing beneath the foam. Some rose again for moments, jutting from the water like broken spears, only to be swallowed once more by the sea's hunger. But not all were lost. On the Irish shore, clusters of stones still stood, firm against the waves. Their perfect shapes caught the eye, rising in neat patterns as if set there by some ancient design. On the coast of Scotland, too, fragments remained, silent, broken reminders of what had once stretched between the lands. The Causeway was no longer a bridge. It was a ruin, a shattered path that told not of triumph, but fear and fury. Banananer's roars echoed across the water as he tore apart the last of the stones nearest Scotland. His voice, once a weapon to terrify, now carried something else, desperation. It rumbled through the storm, a sound that shook mountains and stirred seas, yet it could not erase the truth of his retreat. He had not destroyed the Causeway to win. He had destroyed it to hide his shame. The sea boiled with his rage. Waves rose like towers, smashing against the cliffs of Ireland and Scotland alike. Spray leapt into the air, stinging the eyes of those who dared watch. The storm howled louder, as though the ocean itself wept for the bridge that had bound two worlds together. And then, at last, silence began to return. The stones stopped falling. The waves began to settle. The air cleared, though heavy with salt and memory. And when the people looked again, the bridge of giants was gone. Only fragments remained. On Ireland's northern coast, black columns jutted from the earth, their tops flat and sharp, stretching like stepping stones into the water. Their strange, perfect shapes seemed too precise to be natural, yet they stood as though carved by unseen hands. On the far side of the sea, in Scotland, similar stones rose from the cliffs, broken echoes of what had once been whole. The path was gone, but its bones endured. The people whispered that the sea itself had claimed the bridge, swallowing it so no giant would ever cross again. Others swore it was Banananer's fury that had shattered it, his fists breaking the stones so completely that the ocean could never repair them. But in their hearts, they knew the truth. The Causeway had not fallen by chance, nor by nature. It had been torn apart by the fear of a giant who could not face what he believed awaited him. Finn McCool stood on the shore, the storm fading around him. He looked upon the ruin of the path he had built with his own hands, now scattered and broken. His chest rose with pride that his land was safe, yet also with sorrow. What had been a wonder beyond the work of men was gone, undone in moments of madness. By his side, Unak placed her hand upon his arm, her voice low. "Let it be," she said. "The stones that remain are enough. They will tell the story." And so they did. For centuries after, travelers came to Ireland's coast and stood in awe at the strange, perfect stones. Some believed they were the frozen remains of a giant's road, shattered in anger. Others claimed they were born of fire, carved by the hand of the earth itself. But those who listened to the old tales knew they were the legacy of Finn McCool and Banananer, the ruins of a path built for giants and destroyed in fear. Children would walk upon them, their small feet tapping against the hexagons, and their elders would whisper the day when giants shook the world. Fishermen, setting sail upon the waters, would glance back at the black columns rising from the shore and wonder what shadows lingered beneath the waves. And poets, gazing upon the broken causeway, would weave words of mystery, telling how giants once shaped the very bones of the earth. The causeway's destruction became legend. Ireland and Scotland would never again be bound by a bridge of stone. The sea, wide and restless, would forever stand between them. Yet the fragments that survived told a story no tide could wash away. Even now, when the waves strike those ancient stones, they seem to carry a voice, the whisper of thunder, a memory of giants. The air grows heavy, the heart quickens, and for a moment, it feels as though the shadow of Benandener still lingers, fleeing into the mist. But above all, the stones speak of Finn McCool, the protector who stood unbroken, and of Unak, whose wisdom turned aside a mountain. Together, they etched their tale into the earth, so that long after giants vanished, the world would remember. The causeway was destroyed, but the legend endured, carved forever into the land itself. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the broken stones of the sea. Where once a mighty bridge had stretched between Ireland and Scotland, now only fragments rose from the waves, dark, jagged pillars standing like the teeth of some ancient beast. The causeway was shattered, and the red man of Scotland was gone, his shadow fading into the mists of fear. Ireland stood in silence, the land itself seeming to breathe again. And at its heart was Finn McCool. The people gathered around him, their voices rising in praise. To them, he was not only a giant of flesh and bone, but the guardian of their world. He had stood against a rival so vast that even the earth had trembled beneath his steps. He had endured the challenge, and Ireland remained safe. Songs were sung, fires burned high, and his name was carried upon the wind like a blessing. Yet behind the glory, Finn knew the truth. It was Unaka's wisdom that had turned the tide. Her plan, simple yet brilliant, had saved him from ruin. Without her cunning, Ireland might have lain in ashes beneath the red man's fists. Finn's pride softened into gratitude. He looked upon his wife not as a shadow beside him, but as the mind that kept his strength alive. Together, they were more than giants. They were spirit and wit, bound by love, shaping the fate of a land. Still, Finn was restless. He paced the cliffs when night fell, the wind pulling at his cloak, the sea below roaring with endless fury. His eyes searched the horizon, where the broken causeway reached out into the waters like the fingers of a drowned colossus. Though his rival had fled, though the threat was gone, Finn's heart carried unease. Giants were not creatures of peace. They were born of the earth's strength, and as long as the land lived, there would always be another shadow waiting to rise. Sometimes, in the stillness of dawn, he thought he heard echoes across the sea, the distant roar of a giant's voice, or the crash of footsteps too heavy for man. The waves played tricks, yes, but Finn's heart told him such echoes were not only a memory. Somewhere beyond the horizon, others waited, and so he kept his vigil. The people of Ireland saw him walk the cliffs, tall against the sky, and they drew strength from the sight. Children pointed and whispered, "There walks Finn McCool, protector of Ireland." Elders nodded, their voices low with respect, saying, "So long as he watches, no enemy shall come." His presence was enough to keep fear at bay, though in his own chest the unease never left. The causeway itself became a monument. What had once been a path of war was now a reminder of wisdom. The shattered stone spoke of battles fought, of fury unleashed, but also a wit that had triumphed where strength could not. Travelers who came upon the strange black columns could not help but marvel. Their perfect shapes, their flat tops, their endless stretch into the sea. They did not look as though nature had made them. They looked like the work of giants. And so the legend grew. Fireside tales carried the story from one village to the next. Parents told their children how Finn McCool had faced a red man and how Unaka's cleverness had turned the battle without a blow. Poets sang of the giant who built a bridge from his land to another, a feat no man could ever dream. And with each telling, the myth deepened, becoming part of the soul of Ireland. Generations passed, but the story endured. The causeway remained, its stones refusing to sink, as if the earth itself wished to keep the memory alive. Fishermen set out from the coast and returned with tales of strange sounds upon the waters. booming like footsteps or whispers carried by the waves. Travelers who walked the stones claimed to feel the ground pulse faintly beneath their feet, as though the earth still remembered the weight of giants. Yet even as praise surrounded him, Finn's own heart was never at rest. He would stand by the shattered edge of the causeway, staring across the sea toward Scotland. The mist lay thick, but beyond it, he imagined the cliffs where Banandiner had once roared. He imagined the rivals' retreat, the fury that shattered the path, the fear that had driven him away. And in the silence, Finn wondered, would another come? Would the day arrive when his strength, his wit, and even Unaka's wisdom might not be enough? The thought followed him always. But perhaps that was the price of being protector. To guard was to watch, to carry the weight of fear so others did not have to walk the cliffs so that children could sleep without trembling, to stare into the horizon so that no shadow could cross unseen. And Finn bore that weight. The years rolled on, and the legend of the Causeway stretched further than Ireland's shores. Sailors carried it to distant lands, speaking of a giant who had hurled stones into the sea to build a bridge. Scholars puzzled over the strange columns, wondering how such shapes could exist, while the people knew. They were the work of Finn McCool, the protector who had faced a mountain and endured. But for all the stories, for all the songs, one truth echoed louder than the rest. It was not strength alone that saved a land. It was love. It was wisdom. It was the courage to see beyond pride. When the fires burned low at night, and the sea's voice carried softly through the valleys, elders would lean close and say, "Remember, children, that even the mightiest giant needs the counsel of another." Finn was strong, yes, but it was Unak who saw the way. And the children's eyes would widen, their imaginations filling with images of a cradle large enough for mountains, of a rival fleeing in terror, of stones breaking beneath his steps. The legend was not only of giants. It was of people, of the bond that made giants greater than their size. The causeway still stretches into the sea. Its stones stand silent, black against the waves, their edges sharp, their tops flat, their lines too precise to be chance. Some walk upon them, marveling at their beauty, never knowing the story that birthed them. Others feel the echo of something greater, sensing in the stones a heartbeat of old battles, of giants whose shadows still linger in the mist. And if one listens closely, when the tide strikes hard against the cliffs, there are whispers in the wind, whispers of Finn McCool pacing the heights, whispers of Unaka's calm voice, steady as the earth, whispers of Bananiner's roar, fading into the distance as he fled across the sea. Ireland remembers. The world remembers. For though the causeway is broken, the legend of Finn McCool lives on, etched not only into stone, but into the hearts of all who hear his story. The northern coast of Ireland holds a place where the sea and the land meet in a way unlike anywhere else in the world. Here, the waves strike against black columns that rise from the earth as though shaped by a hand far greater than man's. They stand shoulder to shoulder, thousands of them, each a perfect piece of a vast puzzle. Flat-topped, hexagon stones stretch out toward the water, their pattern too precise, too deliberate, to seem like mere chance. This is a giant's causeway. To some, it is a work of nature. They say fire and time, volcano and ocean, carved the stones over millions of years. They look upon the columns and see the language of science, the patience of the earth written in rock. Yet others stand upon the stones and feel something different, something older, something alive. For when the wind rushes across the cliffs and the sea crashes with endless fury, the causeway seems to speak. Its stones hum faintly beneath the feet of travelers, as though they still remember the weight of giants who once walked there. The air is heavy with whispers, and those who listen closely claim they can hear the echo of footsteps, slow and thunderous, moving just beyond sight. It is no wonder that legends cling to this place as tightly as the waves cling to the rocks. Travelers come from across the world to walk the causeway. They arrive with curiosity, drawn by stories whispered in books and songs. They step onto the stones, cautious at first, then bold, moving further out toward the sea. Each footfall rings faintly against the columns, a hollow sound that carries into the air. Many pause then, for in that moment they feel it. The sense that they are not walking on lifeless stone, but on a path that once trembled under the stride of something far greater. The sea plays its part in the story. Its waves crash against the edges of the causeway, spraying salt into the air, a sound like drums rolling against cliffs. The rhythm joins with the echo of footsteps until mind can almost believe it is listening to giants returning, their march hidden in the mist. The wind rushes low, whistling through cracks in the rock, carrying with it voices that sound eerily like whispers. Some swear they have heard names spoken in that wind. Finn, Unak, Benandiner, carried from an age long vanished. And the mist hides more than waves and stones. On days when the sea is restless, when clouds hang low and the horizon disappears, travelers claim to see shapes upon the cliffs. A tall figure moving slowly, broad-shouldered, his shadow cutting across the hills. He does not linger long. A step, a turn, and he fades back into the mist, as though the land itself swallows him. Skeptics say it is nothing but imagination, tricks of light and fog. Yet those who see it never forget, for deep in their hearts they know the shadow was no trick. It was Finn McCool. The stones, silent and unyielding, carry these stories as though they are carved into their very shape. Children run across them, laughing, their voices echoing against cliffs. Elders walk more slowly, their hands brushing the tops of the columns, eyes filled with reverence. Each generation leaves with the same thought. These stones are more than stone. They are memory. There are those who come with questions, seeking answers in geology and science. They study the hexagons, measure their sides, and explain how molten rock cooled and cracked into perfect shapes. Their words are true, their numbers precise, but even they fall quiet when the wind shifts, when the sea growls, when the ground seems to hum beneath their feet. For no measure, no tool, no science can silence the feeling that lingers here, that the causeway is alive with stories, its stones heavy with footsteps of the past. And so, two truths walk side by side upon the giant's causeway, one of fire and time, the other of giants and legend. The stones belong to both, and perhaps that is why they hold such power. At dusk, when the sun falls low and the sky burns with orange and gold, the causeway takes on an otherworldly glow. The stones gleam, their edges sharp in the fading light, stretching toward the horizon like the remnants of a forgotten road. The sea darkens, its waves rolling heavy and slow, and the air grows quiet, as though even the gulls dare not break the silence. Travelers who linger at that hour often stand still, overcome with a sense of awe they cannot name. Some describe it as beauty, others call it mystery, but all agree it feels as though the land is speaking. What does it say? Perhaps it reminds them of a time when giants walked the earth, when battles shook the ground, when courage and cunning carved history into stone. Perhaps it whispers of Finn's restless watch upon the cliffs, of Unaka's wisdom, of Benandiner's flight and fury. Or perhaps it simply speaks of memory itself, of how the earth does not forget, even when men do. The causeway stands eternal. Seasons change, storms rise and fade, centuries pass, yet the stones remain. Their hexagons fit together like the pieces of a puzzle too vast for human minds to solve. Children are born, grow, and age, but the causeway endures, carrying their laughter as easily as it once carried the footsteps of giants. And so the legend lives on, not only in the stories told by firesides, nor only in the whispers carried by the wind, but in the stones themselves. For those who walk upon the causeway feel it. Something beyond reason, beyond time. They feel the weight of history pressing beneath their feet. The sense that they are not alone, that shadows linger just beyond sight. In the mist, some claim to see Finn, his figure tall upon the high hills, his eyes fixed on the horizon, watching, waiting, guarding Ireland still. Others say they hear him the crash of the waves, his breath carried by the sea, his strength hidden in the stones. The causeway is his monument, his legacy, his voice carved into the land so that no one may forget. And though the red man fled long ago, his shadow too lingers and whispers. The broken path across the sea is a reminder of pride undone by fear, of rage that shattered stone, of a rival who trembled at the sight of a child too large to be believed. His name is spoken less, but the stones hold it still, silent testimony to the day giants change the world. Even now, when storms rise and the sea crashes hard against the cliffs, the causeway seems to awaken. The stones tremble faintly, the wind grows heavy, and the mist thickens until shapes stir within it. Those who stand upon the columns at such times often leave quickly, their hearts pounding, but they know what they have felt. They have walked not upon lifeless rock, but upon the bones of a legend that still breathes. The giant's Causeway speaks, and if you listen closely, it will tell you of giants, of battles, of wisdom, of fear. It will tell you that the earth remembers, even when memory fades. It will remind you that somewhere in the mist, shadows still walk the cliffs, waiting to be seen. The sea sings endlessly against the northern cliff of Ireland. Its voice rises and falls with the tide, a rhythm as old as the world itself. And there, where the land breaks into columns of black stone, the story of Finn McCool lives on. The giant's Causeway stands silent, yet every stone seems to whisper. Some say they are the remnants of fire, born from ancient earth. Others say they are the work of giants, laid one upon another in the heat of challenge. Whatever their beginning, they hold a truth no tide can wash away. Legends are not always written in books. Some are carved into the very land, waiting for those who walk upon it to remember. The tale of Finn McCool is such a legend. It tells of courage, but not courage alone. It tells of strength tempered by cleverness, of pride checked by wisdom, of a battle that was won not by fists, but by the mind of a woman who saw what her husband could not. It reminds us that even the mighty must listen, that even giants are not invincible, and that we can strike harder than stone. The Red Man of Scotland fled in fear, his pride shattered, his path destroyed. Ireland remained safe, not through brute power, but through love and cunning. And though the Causeway lies broken, its fragments rise like silent witnesses, proof that something greater than ordinary life once walked here. Stand upon those stones, and the air feels different. The sea strikes hard, the cliffs hold steady, and the ground hums faintly beneath your feet. For a moment, it is easy to believe the footsteps of giants still echo there. Look to the hills when mist gathers, and shadows seem to stir. The shape of a tall figure appears, broad and watchful, his eyes upon the horizon. Finn McCool, they whisper, still guarding, still waiting. Such stories endure because they speak to more than history. They speak to wonder. They remind us that the earth is alive with memory, that every mountain, every valley may carry secrets older than time. The giant's Causeway is not only a marvelous stone, it is a reminder that legends breathe beneath the surface of our world, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to listen. Children who run across the columns laugh, their voices mingling with the sound of waves, though they cannot help but glance into the mist, half expecting a giant's hand to rise from the sea. Elders who walk the stones move slowly, their eyes filled with knowing, their hands brushing the rock as though touching the past itself. Travelers from far away arrive with curiosity, but leave with silence in their hearts, for they too feel the weight of the place. Every story told around firelight, every whisper carried by the wind, adds another layer to the legend. And as long as voices remember, Finn McCool will never vanish. This is the power of myth. It binds land and people, past and present. It turns stone into story and silence into song. The Causeway is not only rock, it is memory carved deep into the bones of the earth. And so the story of Finn McCool continues to walk among us. It lives in the sea spray that rises against cliffs. It lingers in the roar of storms that strike the coast. It hides in the mist that drifts across the hills. Legends may be old, but they are never gone. They wait, patient to be told again. The tale you have just heard is only one among countless others. Giants, gods, forgotten titans. They all lie buried in the soil of memory, waiting to rise when the time is right. The world is full of places like the Causeway, where myth and land meet, where the boundary between story and truth grows thin. If you have felt the weight of this legend, if the stones of the Causeway now seem alive in your imagination, then walk further with us. There are more stories to uncover. Stories of wonders hidden in time, of shadows that shape the world, of mysteries carved into the earth itself. This is Lost Giants. If you wish to journey deeper into forgotten past, into myths that shaped our world, then stay with us. Like this story, share it with those who, like you, search for wonder, and subscribe so you do not miss the next legend waiting in the mist. For the sea will go on singing, the stones will go on whispering, and the echoes of giants will never die.